Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, you have such a beautiful smile. I got to tell you look great today. You see what happens when you subscribe? You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. On this episode, we talk to Vera Cherepanova, who works with a really cool nonprofit called Boards of the Future, and she works on getting more ethical representation onto boards, something that we're all extremely interested in. We also dive deep on her story, how she got into this space, and we talk a little bit about how to deconstruct the ethical overconfidence that a lot of leaders have. So hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
How you been doing?
Well, what can I say? I'm based in LA, and if you're reading the news, you probably know that the time is difficult here right now.
Yeah.
So
what's going on there? What's going on Ground Zero?
All right, so there's a lot going on Ground Zero, I would say. Part of it is press, part of it is not. So basically, if you go to the area that burned, it looks like a nuclear bomb was dropped there. So this is like absolutely unbelievable. I can give you the number for our neighborhood, and we're in Eastern Malibu. So we had 350 houses, out of which 50 made it through.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. A couple of schools burned, animal shelters, ranchos, farms, everything. It's
the fires are out now, right?
Yeah, but given the weather is not on our side completely this year, the wind would never stop, and we just got another fire close to Santa Clarita area. Luckily, I think there was no property or human life damage, so it was only the plants and the bushes and dry fuel, as they call it, burning. Yeah. But it ignites almost on a daily basis somewhere, and sometimes, sometimes the fire department is reacting well and fast enough, and they can stop it from spreading. Sometimes they can't. So the fire around Santa Clarita, for example, I think it again reached like 1,000 acres or something like that. So that's a lot. That's a lot.
Jeez.
Yeah. So Trump is here today. Maybe
okay.
He's gonna fix everything. In
he's gonna put the fires out. He might even get it rebuilt.
Right. Yeah. He's the guy. He's our guy. So far, I heard that he said he's going to abolish the FEMA, the Federal Agency for Environmental Disaster and Management Help, or something like that. So my application sits with FEMA now because we have. I don't know. I'm not sure it's going to make it through. So we'll see. Terrible time. What can I say? It's just.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we're displaced. We're at an Airbnb. I think it's.
You are? Okay, I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, our house made it through, so it's there. We saw it. It needs to be clean, and everything around it burned. So the whole area, we need a lot of cleaning from the ashes, soot, smoke.
Oh yeah.
So all the plants are gone. So we're going to do some landscaping and stuff like that. So part of the deck is gone, but the house itself is intact, and this is a miracle. This is
total miracle. Yeah.
Yeah, driven by, I would say, a couple of factors. One is the fire system, which worked to perfection. Nobody even thought it would, but it did, and it saved the house. And the second is that this house has a very good position on the hill, and I think it also helped a lot. So there are two roads around, so basically there's like a natural, gap.
Yeah.
So that's kind of important when the embers fly around and winds picks them up and et cetera, et cetera. So the bigger the gap where you don't have that dry fuel or like a house or like a bag, anything of wood, anything that could burn quickly, it's good.
How lucky! I mean, when you were looking at the house, I'm sure you didn't even consider that. You probably were not like, oh, this house is going to be perfect. If there's a fire, we got a massive gap around this dry fuel. We'll be fine.
But I must say that when we came, and that was just a year ago, last winter, we came to Malibu. So we were very, very, how do I say, puzzled perplexed by how much emphasis our neighbors were putting on fire safety.
Really?
Because
Okay.
and our neighborhood boasts some kind of a certification of fire aware or fire preparedness, whatever certification with the LAFD. We kind of looked at all that, say like, there's a bunch of freaks. We have no idea what's
Yeah.
going on here. We're just like a bunch of freaks, whatever. But I gotta say that I'm very grateful to those people because they made it a topic of our concern. They directed our attention to that. And for example, when it turned out to be that we got the house and the fire system was not tested, there was no dry run, we made sure that it's going to be tested. And we tested it like a couple of months before the fire happened. So I got to say, real thank you to our neighbors for being so freaky and so persistent into like, oh, there's a fire brigade training today. What are you going to do? This is Saturday. I know. Do you have any plans? Well, maybe just drop by and, see if you're missing on something, etc. They kept doing it for a year.
Wow.
But I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful in the end that they did.
Well, what a great metaphor for an ethics and compliance department.
Yeah.
You come into a company and you hear all this ethics stuff and you're like, this is crazy. Why is everybody talking about it? And then something happens and you're like, oh, now I see why it matters. And now you're probably a true believer of fire prevention,
Yeah, well, definitely. I'm very good at packing my go bag and
Yeah,
a
exactly.
couple other things. Yeah,
It's always in the trunk now. Yeah. So so you've had a very, very exciting, at least year, probably a couple of years. Talk to us about what brought you out to LA and what you've been working on for the last year.
That was a crazy ride, I would say. I was thinking about my 2024, and from many perspectives, I got 40 at the end of the year. So that, yeah.
Yeah.
Before the big dates, you gotta do all that stuff. Reflect on where you are and what have you done, and yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm glad it's over. I got 40. That's it. Yeah. And of that reflection period, because you don't want to go too deep into that.
Yeah, you don't want to live in that period.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah.
No. So anyway, and I kind of calculated my transatlantic flights. It turned out to be that I made 12 of them in 2024.
Wow.
Which
Okay.
is a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah. And one of my resolutions was to bring this number down a little bit. So we were like half and half exactly, because we were still like having a very solid foot in Europe. But I also wanted to do a lot more stuff in the US. So we got that house here in Eastern Malibu, and we started like looking into moving or I don't know what. So that was a very transition period. It's funny because when people were asking me, because I'm originally from Moscow. I was born and raised in Moscow, Russia, and we have spent 8 years in Europe, 8 years in Italy. And people, Europeans, were asking me, "What do you want? I mean, where are you going? Where are you going? That's great. You have a house. You have a life here. Everything established." But I used to say, like, I want something more exciting. Europe is a little bit boring for me. Maybe
there's not like massive fires all the time over there, at
Yes,
least.
exactly. You got to be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just, yeah. So anyway, I wanted a little bit more excitement in personal life, in professional life. The European part, I had a lot of excitement when I just started working back in the day in Russia. That was really exciting time. And, I had a ton of various experiences. And, I worked at the Russian oligarch's office and I saw everything there.
Wow.
And, I've been threatened and followed and whatever. Right. So a lot of things happened to me there. And then I kind of needed a break from all that excitement, and Europe was perfect. Yeah. So I just ran away from everything. I had a kid, I enjoyed cooking and, living life in a very Dolce Vita style, talking to people about how you raise great grapes and make great wines and et cetera, et cetera. Right. So, but it didn't change my nature, I'm afraid. So yeah. And I wanted more impact and that's why I needed to be in the US. That was actually my thinking.
So for people who are not familiar with you, tell us about what you do. You do some really great work, but walk us through kind of what it is you're working on now. And then I want to kind of go back a little bit on how you got into doing what you're doing now.
Yeah. So right now, my favorite, because I do have a lot of hats, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can quickly go through all of them, or maybe just the key ones. But the project that leaves me like, in flames, absolutely, at this point of time, is Boards of the Future. Boards of the Future is a nonprofit. It was originally set up in Europe, and now I'm bringing it to the US. I still need to do the registration, bureaucratic
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
but yeah, we're up to speed, and we're going to be launching very exciting things this year here in the US. So basically, my founders, the founders of this nonprofit, have a strong ethical orientation. These are the people who can be called as conscious investors. These are the people who are serial entrepreneurs and investors. And when they do their investments, we're not talking about Vanguard or BlackRock volumes. These are smaller investors, but still, when they make their investments and give money to some startups, they want this to be on an ethical side of things, right? So they're explicitly looking into things that will make life better for customers, for the society, for the environment, for everyone, right? So, and with that idea in mind, we met here last year, and I pitched them the problem with ethics and compliance people, because I do not see ethics and compliance people represented on corporate boards and in the C-suites, and I really want to see them there. And there's a big issue and a very direct connection between conscious investors that want companies to do a better job on all social issues, and ethics and compliance people not represented in the center of the decision making of the organization. There is a very direct link, and investors should be pushing for seeing more of that precise talent on corporate boards and in the C-suite. So I pitched that idea to them. They said, "Oh, wow, that's great. That's great. Let's do it." Right. And that's basically my job now. I'm advocating. My main task is to advocate for more people with ethics and compliance backgrounds on corporate boards.
So how does that, so you're fighting a battle. How does that battle work? Where are you fighting? What are your weapons?
There are many of them. And it turns out to be that the idea was actually very right. Boards have absolutely no concept of what we do and who we are. All that they know about us is that we're ticking the boxes, and we're making sure that we keep track of various legislations and regulations coming out, and we're not letting the organization break things on a big scale via those regulations, right? So this is all they know. They don't know that we do ethics and we know something about it. They don't know that we look into behaviors, and they don't know that we do culture. Absolutely not. And since I started working as the executive director of Boards of the Future, I started more and more going to board of director meetings. I just came back from the dinner with women corporate directors last evening, where I met 10 wonderful female board directors who, again, have very little idea of what we can bring to the table. And, I started talking with them, and I see their eyes, surprise. Wow, we didn't know, right? So this is very genuine. We didn't know. Yes, and that's a very big issue. That's a very big issue. So my primary focus here is to make sure they know, right? So, and the second step here is to make sure that people meet each other, right? So I'm thinking about myself as a facilitator here.
Yeah, connector.
I really want the board members to meet ethics and compliance, senior ethics and compliance people, see how great they are, what they can bring to the table, ignite themselves with that, go to their HR departments, go to their boardrooms and say, hey, we must be missing out on something. And to make it a little bit easier for everyone, because it's not that like out of the blue, a chief compliance officer is going to be invited to sit on a board, right? It's not working like that, right? So you got to be board
maybe
ready.
You're a board advisor first or something, or,
Exactly. So we're also educating both sides on various workarounds and how we can make it easy and approachable for both sides. For example, apprenticeships or fellowships, depending on where you find those programs, they can be called differently. Advisory boards, observation boards, representation boards, shadow boards. I have seen these things being called in various ways. But in a nutshell, if we talk about apprenticeship, for example, this is you are placed on a board for 18 months because you have been selected in your company as a high potential, top talent, whatever. So we place you on a board for 18 months for you to go through a real business school and see if you up to this challenge to see if this is for you. Right. And for the board to get an input and see if you're a good fit, right? And after these 18 months, both sides hopefully get, a lot more informed opinion of whether it's going to go forward or not. There is even a government program around board apprenticeships in the UK. I think they launched it a couple of years ago, and so far the feedback was exceptional.
I bet.
Because the boards typically say we got what we didn't have from that person. We did not have that insight. We did not have that expertise. We did not have that perspective, and we got it with that apprenticeship program, which is great. Which adds a lot of value.
Yeah, and I think. Yeah. No, I was just going to say that that expertise is needed today to a much higher degree than it was needed, say, 30 years ago. Would you agree with that? The expertise that these kinds of folks bring to a board, where the board after this apprenticeship or after these 18 months, they're like, this is great. This is exactly what we were looking for. Or this is the expertise we need. There's a gap in that expertise in most boards, to your point. What is it you think they end up seeing that they're like, oh my gosh? So I just want to let me zoom out. Everyone's talking about compliance, ethics people need to be on boards. I've heard that 1,000 times. You're one of the first people I've talked to that's actually doing something about it. You're clearing the way out. You're building a pathway so more folks can get on that board. So if nothing else, I think a listener should be able to listen to this and get some confidence that there is a path to a board, and and our expertise would fill a gap that is needed. Okay, first of all, what do you think those board members who have that light bulb moment end up seeing? Or what do the women at that meetup that you just talked about, you described them as like their eyes got wide. What did they hear that caused their eyes to get wide, that opened their eyes to a potential that maybe they were not taking advantage of even within their own company?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think the eye get really wide when the discussion starts around ethics, right? Because ethics is not something. Ethics is not the word that you hear in the boardroom. Okay.
Yeah, correct.
And I talk to a lot of board members, and they very honestly tell me, Vera, ethics wonderful, but when I am sitting on the board, when I'm in the boardroom, I never hear that word, which does not mean that ethics is not a part of the decision-making process, because for any corporate decision, there are always trade-offs and there are always ethical implications. So taking the example of yesterday's dinner, the topic which actually bothers board members a lot these days is the communication strategy, or better, they think that this is communication strategy. So the question is, when do they need to say something when something bigger happens in this world, and when do they need to keep silent? We were talking about the fires explicitly yesterday because we're in LA, everybody's talking about the fires, right? And one lady mentioned that some companies did issue public statements with regards to the buyers, how they help or what they think, how they feel, whom are they protecting,
Yeah.
employees, customers, whatever. And some companies didn't. And the discussion evolved into, what do you think? Did they all need it to say something or
Right.
not? Because it does seem like it's a zero-sum game in today's world. Because whether the company or the CEO or the board said something or they don't, they are ostracized and they are criticized, and they
Yeah.
find themselves in a cold war, because whether you do speak or whether you don't, you know.
Yeah. You can't
So
win for losing.
yeah, absolutely. So, and I pointed them to the fact that it's not that they need another PR consultant, because PR consultants with their communication strategies are precisely the people who got us here.
Yeah, exactly. Here, this is going to
Because,
sound good. Here, say this, whether
yeah,
you mean it or not. The market's
exactly.
going to need to hear this. Exactly.
Listen, I've been reading the Edelman Trust Barometer yesterday morning, and what caught my eye is the record high number of people, 68%, saying that top management, boards, executives are grossly exaggerating their claims and
2 out of 3.
telling lies.
Two out of three.
Yes.
Right.
All right. And this is where the communication strategies got us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because whatever was happening in the world, social, environmental, whatever, boards and companies and CEOs were exercising on the communication strategies and saying, yes, this is very important for us. We're going to do everything to fix that issue. We're going to be doing whatever it takes, right? And they were telling us to everything which was happening, which is absolutely not realistic at best.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And all
if
of
everything
that,
matters, nothing matters. You know what I mean?
Nothing matters. Exactly. Right. So, but it's actually about ethics. It's actually about how what do you communicate to this world, and your real priorities. And there's a very big ethical underpinning of that, which boards do not understand. They still say it's all about how you communicate. Well, I said at yesterday's dinner, it's not what you say, it's that what you stand for.
Yeah, it's what you do, right?
And basically, ethics and compliance are the right people to help here, because they're going to be keeping in check all that communications, right? And putting a stop or a pause, saying like, look, if we're not going to be doing this, maybe we just don't need to promise, because
Yeah, exactly.
people in the end are going to feel it, and this is exactly what we see in the trust barometer being reflected. People just don't believe this anymore, because these are just empty promises.
I wonder how that particular metric changed over the last 5 years as ESG went from nobody heard of it to it being on the front page of the Wall Street Journal every day for like a year and a half. And then now it seems to be like no one talking about it anymore. I mean, ESG was like, when it was first coming out, we did a series of webinars across a bunch of different channels about the risk of kind of greenwashing your way through it and not making claims that you can't back up and not making claims that, you're actually doing. And, I think Allison Taylor, who I think kind of got famous during that period of saying, like, pick a couple of things that you're actually going to do that you actually care about, as opposed to saying, well, we care about all these different things, when you're really just kind of paying lip service to it. I just feel like that destroys the push toward kind of a truly, ethical organization, right? Like an ethical company, an ethical culture is an ideal that we're never going to meet, just like perfection. But we want to close that gap. We want to continue to get closer and closer and continuously improve to, stamp out the wrongdoing and make, doing the right thing more kind of consistent and more, normal inside the organization, right? But then when corporately we put out these statements that really sound really good, but then internally you're like, we're not doing this. It really deteriorates a lot of the credibility from that, that voice at the top.
Exactly. I have never seen a list of 50 priorities in my life. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
right. There's one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. 2, 3, as a max 5. These are the things that lie close to your business model. In economic theory, there is a term for that, externality, right? The things that really, really are close to what you're doing rather than like, oh, company sitting somewhere in Norway and making a statement about LA fires. Not necessarily, not necessarily, right? So you gotta be caring about the things that lie close to what you do.
Well, I mean, what do you think the drive is behind those kinds of statements? Are those marketing documents? Are ESG statements marketing documents ultimately at the end of the day that just look like, hey, look what a great company we are. Look how we're helping with the fire. And if in fact they are that, or they're so close to that, how do we prevent leadership who's maybe controlling the release of these statements and this information from tipping into kind of an inauthentic, type of a statement? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about. How do we prevent them from causing this negative externality across the business in terms of people believing what they're saying? Is it merely just having some ethical voice in the room?
These are all very difficult questions. I will try my best, yeah, to tackle them, but not necessarily that I'm up to a challenge, because these are really like big questions. So in terms of how do we stop that vicious circle of everyone just copying each other and issuing those statements and promises and pledges? I would be really after the media here. I'm sorry to all my friends working in the media, because what I have seen in the recent years, any company who made a tiny attempt to be genuine and authentic and say like, hey, we tried to fix our supply chain, but
these are the realities.
Yeah. So, we did that and we tried to do this, but we're still not on a good track to that. We're attacked in the media,
Right.
These were the companies who were on the first pages of newspapers. These were not the companies who just copied the statements. That was fine, and nobody was after them. No, the journalists were after those companies trying to actually picture the reality. All right.
And so what is that company, people, companies, whatever, we respond to incentives, and that creates an implicit incentive to not be authentic, to your point.
Exactly. And that fuels the isomorphism, the thing when companies are just copying each other and trying to not stick their head in any direction, because my peers are doing this, I'm going to be doing this too. And, all of the boards do that. All of the CEOs do that. They always ask, what are our competitors doing, right? How are they tackling that problem? Do they issue a statement? Then maybe we should do this too. All right. So, and this is really a vicious circle. And I'm not even saying that I see any kind of way out of here, because all of those factors are like, they breed on each other.
Totally.
Yeah.
There's kind of a corollary to this thing in public companies of managing to Wall Street analysts. So public companies have a tremendous pressure to hit their earnings estimates, quarter by quarter. So this allows for a certain short-termism to creep in to the company, to where there may be, maybe what's best for the company in the long term is in contrast or in conflict with what it would take to hit my numbers this quarter. And so companies end up falling into this short-termism where they're just kind of kicking the can and they're just trying to hit those numbers instead of zooming out and saying, well, I might miss my numbers for a quarter or two, but this is what's best for the company over the long term. And there's a small group of CEOs that seem to have the confidence to say, I'm going to run my business. The stock price is going to do what it does, and I'm not going to give Wall Street any kind of a guidance. That's a very rare CEO to do that. Most CEOs are going to give that guidance, and they're going to pull out all the stops to try to hit those numbers. And what I found is that the CEOs that are in that first camp, who are more apt or more likely to just, do the right thing over the long term, their stock price, ironically, paradoxically, outperforms other folks. They have a bigger premium, they grow faster because they're focused on the right things. And I just think, I guess I'm asking you, do you think that differential, is it just a confidence issue that one group of CEOs, they're confident that that long-term view is going to wind them up in a better spot than the short-term hitting quarter by quarter numbers, or is it merely a different perspective on how business works? That, hey, I'm not, everything doesn't grow in sort of a straight line, and I just need to focus on what I can control. Like, do you see some kind of an overlap between this kind of earnings management thing that happens in public companies and the desire to put out statements that resonate with the marketplace?
Yeah, sure. There is a direct link here, and there is also another direct link to the incentives and the bonus package of the CEO himself or herself.
Great point.
Right, because more often than not, this is going to drive that person to make decisions in favor of short-termism, right? And because if that person's options are going to be vested in 5 years,
right,
why care what happens in 10, right? You got to get your bonus package and go to some nice place and enjoy yourself, to Bahamas or whatever. Right. So the incentive package of the CEO plays a role, and also the character of the CEO plays a role, and here we can go to Aristotle's thoughts about vices and virtues, and strengths of the character. I see many CEOs like to go through coach sessions with athletes and athletic coaches to train themselves, to be more resilient for success, for like a high performing athlete. But I would rather see those sessions be devoted to becoming more strong in terms of the character and the vices and virtues predominantly, right? So that would be, I think, much nicer as a coaching session. So several factors at play, incentives of the CEO, the character of that CEO, and also who is around and what those people around the board specifically and the C-suite, what voices are around, what those voices say to the CEO, right? CEOs have very big egos. It's not rocket science. I think we all know, for good reasons, for not so good reasons, they think that they see things that others don't, very well. And it's hard to confront that, right? It's hard to stand up and say, look, this strategy is not going to work. It's easier said than done.
Right.
And also, would that CEO even listen to you, right? But the only thing that they all care about is actually their legacy. Right? Ego, but legacy. What kind of legacy are you gonna leave? What are people gonna be remembering you of? Right? What did you do to be remembered in a good way? Because we all want to be remembered in a good way. And this is where the argument of ethics and compliance kicks in, the legacy point. This is a very, very strong argument. Yeah.
So how do you go about that argument? How do you go about bringing this issue up and tying it to legacy so that it actually resonates with this high ego person whose endorsement you need to do what you want to do?
Well, you gotta know the background of that person, right? What matters to that person? Maybe there was something in the past which would actually resonate. Some personal story on the background. Maybe that person is not like from the Ivy League school and been privileged the whole life. Maybe it is an immigrant. Maybe like at certain points of time, life was tough or whatever, right? So you gotta know the personal story so that you can tailor your message to that, for that message to resonate well, And again, appeal to the sites where most of the caring is gonna occur.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's about knowing your adversary. I call the adversary just whoever you're trying to convince, whoever you're trying to persuade. And I think if you don't know that person or you assume too much, then the odds of you resonating with them are just greatly diminished,
Absolutely. Because it's not about ChatGPT style generated arguments. It
correct.
it has to come through. You can imagine that being at the top of a large company, how much information is, bombarding you, how much of a stimulus, is bombarding you all the time. And it's so overwhelming that I think, if you would like to stay resilient and on top of the game, you have to shut all of that down to a certain extent. You got to train yourself not to react to every second stimulus or overreact, right? Because otherwise you're just going to burn yourself out very fast. So you gotta come through that, right? Come through that wall, come through that obstacle. And to do that, you need to have convincing arguments that will resonate internally with Indeed, and connect the legacy thing with the business side and what the business can do for the legacy to look better in the eyes of the person who is in front of you.
I see people hit that wall a couple times and then they just kind of give up. But I believe that wall can always get knocked down. You always can find a way through that wall. And I think you're right. I think it's a question of picking that lock. You got to figure out how that lock is constructed and figure out how those pins hit that tumbler and how you can, move them out of the way. Every ethical argument is not like a master key that can pick every single lock, right? It has to be crafted for that individual. Why do you think we have such a hard time with that persuasion thing? Because you just articulated exactly what persuasion is. I have to understand my adversary. I have to understand how they're wired and what they care most about. And I have to structure my argument or my persuasion path in a way that's going to resonate with them at that core level and overcome this wall, this attention wall that they build because they have to sort through stuff all the time. To your point, you get bombarded with fires and everything's a fire, everything's a big deal. And really, in actuality, not everything is, right? So what encouragement would you give somebody who may have hit that wall a couple of times, trying to convince their CEO to do something and they haven't been able to get traction and they've just given up? What advice would you give them to exhibit that resilience to continue to push forward?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew. But yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a very big challenge for anybody, whether you're good on persuasion traits or skill or whatever you call it or not. I would say personal conviction and the amount of effort and caring that you actually put into that. Do you strongly believe into what you're trying to convince your adversary of? Do you strongly feel about it or not? Because if you don't, you will give up eventually, I think, quite fast. You will give it a couple of tries and, hearing no, especially from a high-ranked person, boss, that's hard. That's really hard. So it can take a serious toll on many people. So if you don't feel that, that fire inside of you, we're talking about fire all the time today, but if you're not convinced 100% inside of you, I think you will eventually fail, because again, your adversary will also feel that somehow.
I mean, you're so good. You're so right. I mean, selling is just a transfer of emotion. If I can get you to feel about this thing the way I feel about this thing, then you're going to take the action that I want you to take. That's just how sales, persuasion, whatever influence works. And you said the key word a couple of times, feel. You have to feel that. If I'm ever going to transfer an emotion to you, I have to have that emotion probably to 3, 4, 5 times greater intensity. You know what I'm saying? And so we can't just pay lip service to it, because that's not going to have enough fuel in our tank to continue to push forward when we hit that resistance. I think you're so right. I'd love to hear, how did you get into this game? You talked about being in Russia and saying you wanted more, and you went to Italy. Walk us through that path, because it has a lot of interesting turns.
Yeah. Well, I've been, changing places where I live and companies and how I work. So I was born and raised in Moscow, Russia, where I started my career. I started as an internal auditor, actually, and then the whole thing of anti-corruption compliance came to the country, and it was brought in with the Western businesses after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So Western investors started to appear on the market. So my first employer, for example, was E&Y. I used to be very proud of that. I'm not sure I should be that proud anymore because
they just pass out CPAs over there, don't they?
Yeah. So there's a lot going on in that space. But anyway, at that point of time, I was super proud, and I learned so much from E&Y. I had a great manager and a great team, and
it's a great company.
Yeah,
and it gives such great experience.
Absolutely, yes. So, and then I transitioned to working as an internal auditor. And then the compliance came into the country. And what happened is that my GM, my general manager, called me and I said, look, there's this email from headquarters. They want us to do something about anti-corruption compliance. You will do it. And I said, okay, yeah, I guess I will. I don't have other choice. So at first I was like, what? What's that thing? But I got really excited about that thing at the end, and I stayed in compliance for quite a while. So for 5 years, I was combining internal audit / compliance under one roof in one department, and I had sub departments doing internal auditing and mostly anti-corruption compliance. And then I've been working in house for 10 years at that point of time, and I thought I learned so much. Maybe I'm just burned out a little bit. Maybe I wanted some reflection time or whatever. And also we started thinking about moving out of the country, and we decided to go to Italy. There's no beautiful story on a background of that, which is, we've been to Italy a couple of times, and as everybody else, loved the country. And when we started discussing internally where should we go, my husband said, well, you like it in Italy, maybe let's try Italy. And I said, okay, maybe let's try it, and this is how it happened. So I wrote a book on compliance in the Russian language. Part of it was written in Italy, part of it was written still in Moscow. That was a great experience because that was like a summary of 10 years of my practice.
Yeah.
Right. And this book went really well, and it is now still used in Russian-speaking countries
cool.
for teaching compliance and ethics at the universities.
Congrats, that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. There's unfortunately not much going on in Russia precisely at this point of time in terms of ethics and compliance, but all the countries around, so the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Ukraine. I have a very, very big fan base in Ukraine, by the way. Hello, if you're listening. So anyway, in every country where people speak Russian, this book is there. And I've received a lot of good feedback on that one. So, and then I thought, what do I do in Italy? Do I go and work for a corporation, or maybe I do something on my own? And I decided to go on my own. I founded a small consultancy. I called it Studio Ethica. Which is very, very close to the name of your company.
I know. Yeah, very close.
And started working. My first client was my ex-employer, as it always happens if you part ways in good terms, right? So, and then word of mouth, speaking at conferences. I was trying to build, because I had to start from scratch. Everybody knew me in Russia because of the book and because I was in the market, and also spoke at some events, was a part of compliance club, et cetera. But in Europe, I had to start from scratch. So I've sent a couple of pieces to the FCPA blog, which unfortunately is no longer here with us. But anyway, started writing for them. Started going to podcasts, events, everything else, and started to connect with people. And I've been doing it for 7 years, which was fine, which gave me a lot of flexibility because, as I said, I had a kid at that point of time, and also wanted to have some, more quiet, life balance, geared towards life a little bit more than to work. So that worked really well, but the kid is growing, and I thought maybe I'm up for another challenge. And this is when I met the founders of the Boards of the Future, and this is when things started to take a shape. And again, yeah, because of my husband's work last autumn, we found ourselves here in Southern California. We really, really liked it here. And we made some steps to be here a lot more. And that's exactly where I am now.
What a story, man. I want to go back to when you were voluntold to figure out about compliance. You said that you got into it and you really liked it. What did you like about it?
I think I was idealistic from day one. The whole family has been freaking out when I was like 6 years old, and I would teach everyone, no, this is not the right thing to do. No, Dad, you're speeding. Don't you see there is a road sign that says, I see that you're over it, slow down. So everyone was kind of laughing at that trait at that time. But I think when I saw compliance and what it is about, I thought, the whole discipline.
Yeah, I can tell people they're doing something wrong all the time. That's amazing. Yeah.
Amazing, right? So yeah, and it had my heart. Yeah, it had my heart. And I was ostracized, and not all people were supportive, and not maybe even my family, I would say, because, well, you can imagine doing anti-corruption work in a very corrupt country. You're making a fool of yourself to a certain extent, because some people were like very explicitly laughing at me and saying, like, do you actually believe in what you're saying, and do you kind of get it? That what you're saying is not very close to reality you're in. But I was absolutely on that topic, on that task, and I said, yeah, I do believe, I do. And if I don't start with myself, nothing is gonna change. So I haven't lost my passion. I haven't lost my belief. So I'm gonna continue.
I love that. What was that like, though? I mean, did you feel like the lone voice crying in the wilderness? Being in this, as you said, a company or in a country that doesn't have the same ethical commitment that others that you've lived in had, did it feel like you were swimming upstream? Was it frustrating, or did it rather feel like, man, because I'm starting from such like a low bar, I can really see the impact of what I'm doing?
It was frustrating. It felt lonely. Yeah, I did feel lonely at certain points of time, I would say. And at certain points, I would also like self-doubt a little bit.
Yeah.
Am I really doing it right? And maybe people are telling me good things to find something else. Maybe go back to internal auditing or something like that. But what I also felt is that, and I still believe in that people are genuinely, they gravitate towards doing the right thing. There are a lot of circumstances. And there were a lot of circumstances in Russia at that point of time, which pushed people to do various things on the spectrum, and the country changed a lot. There was all the things brought by free market, democracy, etc., etc. Everything was upside down, and we turned from a socialistic model to a capitalistic model. And we know, and research confirms that when that huge transition and huge change happens, capitalism becomes very angry. At first, it's very aggressive, and aggressive capitalism is also not very good and not very healthy. So the main value was money, right? Earning money, which is not very good, because we know that sometimes that orientation can drive things astray. Absolutely. And I had a lot of yes, that was hard, frustrating, etc., but also I had a lot of pity, and I had a lot of sympathy to people. So I understood whenever I was confronted with a case inside of the company I had to investigate, and there was some kind of a misconduct, whatever, especially at the lower levels of the organization, I understood and I empathized with the motives behind, with the rationalizations behind that. And I don't know which part was actually harder, because I still had to fire those people, and
Yeah, right.
I still had to
There
do
were
my
still
job.
violations. Right.
Yes, that was a violation, and that was a zero tolerance for that, absolutely. So I still had to exercise my power and do my job well, but I did understand that this is hard, right, to make a right choice in those circumstances. And sometimes it broke my heart.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Yeah, because I mean, there's really, you know, it's not like all these people are just walking around and they're just like evil people. It's someone
No.
who's in a moment presented with an incentive, they're presented with an opportunity, and sometimes they take it because we're also rationalization machines as human beings. You can always rationalize your behavior, you know? Do you feel like coming from that background and coming from uh, you kind of cut your teeth in a country that was going through tremendous change. And like you said, the pendulum was swinging from, sort of a socialist model to a capitalist model. And in that swing, it sort of swung so far. It was all about money that creates all these sort of perverse incentives for people to behave in certain ways. Do you feel like the empathy that you developed at that chapter in your life has helped you as you went to Italy and you had your private practice, and as you are now working with this nonprofit trying to drive more ethical behavior and representation on boards? How has that? How did that early chapter of your life? How did that, and how does that continue to influence how you show up and how you can resonate with people?
Yeah, I think it did. I think it absolutely helped, and I think it informed everything I did from that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually pushed me to look more into behaviors, because at the beginning compliance was all about following the rules. Here's the rule, you need to follow this, point one, point two, point three. If you don't follow that, you're just in violation of that rule, goodbye, right? But getting into the situations again with people who misbehaved, and getting to know their motives and everything which was on the background of that situation, that pushed me a lot more to look into behaviors, into behavioral science. That pushed me a lot more to educate myself on that, and understand that there are underlying drivers of everything that we do or we don't do, right? And how all of that plays out in the group, like in a team, on the team level, on the organization level, how the organization is a sub context or subculture of a bigger context and culture, which is happening in the country, right? So it made me realize all of those interdependencies and interconnectedness. I'm not sure I got that word right,
You
but
did.
anyway,
You did.
yeah. So it kind of opened me my eyes towards a bigger picture, much bigger picture than I thought of anti-corruption compliance before, right? So I think it
Yeah.
made me much better as a compliance professional. Yeah, in the end.
Yeah. I think, when you can recognize the complexity and you can recognize those interdependencies, as you said, the odds of you putting something forward, whether it's a new policy or it's a new, way to engage, putting something forward that's actually successful is, I think, a lot higher. Have you heard this concept of like ethical overconfidence? So this is like when you talk to a CEO about, hey, our ethics program needs to get bigger, and they're like, what do you mean? We're ethical. Do you feel like the rate of ethical overconfidence is influenced by that broader culture, the country culture, or something like that? I just find, so let me just kind of tell you my perspective on this. Um, I think that ethical overconfidence increases as you go higher up in an organization, and it probably increases uh, based on the extent to which someone thinks that they're living in an ethical economy or something. When in actuality, it seems like in those kinds of scenarios that I'm describing, where these kind of dynamics are in play, it's easy to underestimate the likelihood of unethical behavior occurring, and thus it's likely that you're going to also underestimate the cost of noncompliance within your organization. If you think this is true, how do we kind of right that ship, and how do we frame it in a way to help bring an executive's confidence level down to something that's more accurate? You know what I'm saying? Like this
yeah,
ethical overconfidence is a killer, you know?
yeah, yeah. We are already ethical. Yes, I have heard that phrase many times. Yeah, just yeah. We are already ethical. We don't need to work on our culture. We already have the best people. Nothing is going to happen to us. We have the best processes. We have the best business model. Ethics, we don't have any ethical issues here. I've never heard of that because our people are the best. So this is a very typical response that I get when I come with some kind of an ethical training or culture conversation to the highest level of large organizations, large, small, all kinds of organizations, right? And overconfidence, not even going into ethics, overconfidence is a killer in general, I would say, at the highest levels, right? Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate, said famously that if he had a magic wand, the bias that he would eliminate would be overconfidence. That's what he said. So that's a very big issue. And to answer your question, how do we ground that? There is a wonderful technique. I recommend using it a lot. Pre-mortems. It's really not such a big deal. So this is a team exercise. It's good for every level of the organization. And for example, when you're deliberating a strategy or you're launching a new product, project, whatever. So what you got to do, you got to hand out sheets of paper to your team members, board members, C-suite members, and say, let's imagine that the project or the product went live and it was a total disaster. It happened. Can you please write down why? What happened? What went wrong? And this is such a powerful exercise because, first of all, you're taking out all the nerve around, raising your hand at a team meeting when everybody's like, yeah, we got to do it. Yeah, we got it. And you're like, hey, you know what?
We didn't think of this. Yeah. Killing the mood. Right.
Yeah. So it takes that out. It takes that out. Also, people get really competitive. Who's going to come in 2 minutes? This is a group exercise. We only have 2 minutes. Who's going to come up with more options, brazier options, more thoughtful options, some perspectives nobody else is going to address? It becomes competitive. People really put an effort into that, and it creates a lot of candor and the psychological safety around, discussing really the things that might go wrong without any strings attached, without any risk that you're sticking your head way too far. It's a very good exercise. It's a very good exercise for any level, and I recommend absolutely everyone should be doing this.
So powerful. I call that a pre-mortem. You do a post-mortem after something, is launched and maybe it didn't go right. That pre-mortem, to your point, is so powerful. And I love how it removes that big impediment for people actually speaking up, which is that fear of retaliation, which can happen when everyone is cheering in the room and you raise your hand and say, hey, we didn't think about this thing. That's a really smart, Vera. So Vera, where can people find you? Because I just can't say enough great things about you. Your energy in this space is phenomenal. The impact that you're having, and you're really actually changing some of these things that everybody's been talking about for as long as I've been in this space, more representation on the board. So how can people get in touch with you and find you, and where can they see you?
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words of support. I really appreciate that. And thank you for having me on this podcast too. So I'm on LinkedIn a lot. You can connect with me. Boards of the Future has a LinkedIn page too. You can become a follower. I have a personal website if you're interested, veracherepanova.com. Boards of the Future has a website, newboards.org. You can check these things out. I write a column at Corporate Compliance Insights. It comes out every month. It's called Ask an Ethicist. You can read this, and I would be happy to hear your feedback because I'm trying to make myself look like a moral philosopher in that call,
Yeah.
which is tough. Yeah, and I'm not
But it's what
claiming
you were born to do, though, in a way.
yeah. But anyway, I'm not claiming to be more ethical than anybody else and to be a better moral philosopher than any of us. So I really appreciate people coming forward and say like, look, you got it completely wrong, or yes, you got it right, or whatever. Um, what else? Yeah, I don't know. I'm
That's
at conferences a lot, Yeah, come up and shake hands. I'm super friendly and always happy to make new compliance and ethics friends. Yeah, I will be at Compliance Week National this year. I'm gonna be at SCC Europe, SCC Nashville. So yeah, please come up. I'm really friendly.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was so fun. And I will see you I think I'll probably see you at Compliance Week.
Awesome. Sounds great.
All right, we'll see you soon.